Welcome to another edition of the Monday Morning Tennis Rant. Today I'm going to talk about the Laver Cup, and if you go to Twitter or Instagram this morning, you're going to see a lot of hate being thrown at the Laver Cup. People are saying that the Laver Cup is over, it's just a glorified exhibition, and so on. Now the reason why people are saying this is because Europe showed up without its biggest stars. There was no Djokovic, no Alcaraz, no Tsitsipas, no Rune, no Sinner. And several other players that were ranked a little bit lower were also missing. Now the interesting thing to me is that Sinner and Alcaraz are on their way to China right now. So it's not like they're injured, they just decided not to play. And that is a little bit worrisome for the Laver Cup. The world completely destroyed Europe this year. It wasn't even a contest. It was definitely the worst Laver Cup so far. There's no doubt about that. So let me tell you what I think about the Laver Cup. And we have to go back to 2017 when it was first announced. And I hated the idea initially because I'm not a big fan of exhibitions. I'm sure you've seen exhibitions where players don't really take the game seriously. For example, players will end up at the net, they start volleying to each other, eventually hitting a ball with their head. And to me, that's not fun or funny. I'm sure some people are entertained by it, but I want to see players try their hardest and compete at their maximum level. That to me is the most fun. So I initially thought that the Laver Cup is going to be a glorified exhibition, but I was completely wrong, because I can tell you that when I started watching this became one of my favorite events of the year. So much that I would take notes during it. And what I found so fascinating about the Laver Cup was that you had the three GOATs coaching each other. And I learned so much throughout these last few years of the Laver Cup. Also the fact that you had Nadal and Federer play doubles together. I mean, there are so many unbelievably iconic pictures of those two guys on the court together. I remember one where both of them were going for an overhead. And if I could find that as a poster, I would hang that up on my wall. So people were absolutely mesmerized with the fact that these guys were not only on the same team, but also playing doubles together. Now, one worry I had back then was this whole concept of Europe versus the rest of the world, because it doesn't seem very fair, and it's based on the idea that Europe is absolutely dominating tennis, which was true for the last couple of decades. Now, for you guys that have been following my series, What Happened to American Tennis, you know that I always list how many players each country has in the top 100. And I can tell you that, for example, in 2017 when the Laver Cup started, close to 80% of players in the top 100 were from Europe. And this number remained pretty consistent until very recently. There has been a slight shift. So right now, 62 players from Europe in the top 100. So the number went down from like 75, 80% to now closer to 60%. So there's definitely a little bit of a shift. There's other countries that are doing really well. For example, Australia has 9 players in the top 100. Argentina has 7 players in the top 100. Japan has 3 players in the top 100. China 2. There are many countries in South America that have 1 or 2 players in the top 100. So Europe is not as dominating of a force as it has been for the last couple of decades. But if you look at the top of the game, it's still completely dominated by Europeans. There's only one non-European in the top 10, and that's Taylor Fritz. The guys that have chances to win the Grand Slams, players like Medvedev, Alcaraz, and Djokovic are of course European. So the concept of the Laver Cup still makes sense, but only if those players are participating. That's the big thing. And even Federer in an interview yesterday said that he would like to see Djokovic and Alcaraz compete. You know, players like Zverev, Sinner, Medvedev, Tsitsipas, these guys need to be there in order for this event to make sense. And what my suggestion would be to bring some of the legends who are still on tour to the Laver Cup, because obviously the choices that the teams are making is not based on ranking, because they brought in Monfils this year. And I'm sure if Kyrgios was available to play, the world would have taken Kyrgios. So why not take guys like Andy Murray, Dominic Thiem, and Stan Wawrinka? These guys are Grand Slam champions. They have the star power, and it would have been really exciting to see these guys on the Team Europe. Not only for them actually be on the court, but what's so fascinating about the Laver Cup is the interactions between the players on the bench. And if you have these legends there, it's going to be a lot more interesting to watch. And while I do think that tennis is in good hands, and by good hands I mean the left and the right hand of Carlos Alcaraz, because he's the only one who's at the level of the three GOATs, I do think that tennis is going to have a problem when Djokovic retires. And thankfully he's fit enough where he's going to be playing for a few more years. But the popularity of the big three is a big problem for tennis in the grand scheme of things. I don't think it's going to affect the Grand Slam tournaments because those are attended really well, but I have heard that the Laver Cup this year wasn't attended that well. There were a lot of empty seats, and I don't know the viewership numbers, but I can imagine that it was a lot lower than, for example, last year where everybody was glued to the TV watching Federer's last match. And fact is that Nadal and Federer are the two most popular tennis players in the history of tennis. Nobody has ever been as popular as those two guys. Now, one way to measure that popularity is when people are willing to tattoo Federer and Nadal on their bodies. And I've seen a video of a guy at a restaurant coming up to Federer and showing him a tattoo of Federer on his arm, and I've seen a guy with a Nadal tattoo on his calf. And yes, I've seen tattoos of Novak Djokovic on people as well. Now think about this. Can you imagine anybody walking around with a Taylor Fritz tattoo? Now if somebody does have a Taylor Fritz tattoo, please reach out to me. I would like to talk to you. But my point is, while I'm not putting any disrespect on the players that were featured at the Laver Cup, these are phenomenal players. These are elite athletes. They're super fun to watch. You have to understand that it's going to be very difficult to match the popularity of Nadal, Federer, and Djokovic as well. The only person who has the power to do so is Alcaraz. So not only the Laver Cup, but the whole tennis scene depends on Alcaraz, because think of the top of the ATP rankings without Alcaraz. Let's hope that he is not plagued by injuries like Nadal, but without Alcaraz, comparatively speaking, again, no disrespect to the players that are playing today. These are phenomenal players. They're really fun to watch, but comparatively speaking to top 10s of previous eras, even with Alcaraz and Djokovic, these top 10s are a lot weaker. I made a community post a while back. I asked people, rate from best to worst the top 10 of the last, and 99% of the people agreed that the current top 10 is the weakest comparatively speaking. Of course, most people also agree that the strongest top 10 was the one that had the big three present. So that is the problem for the Laver Cup and for tennis in general. For it to have this huge popularity, it needs superstar players. And as I said a couple of weeks ago, from the US, I do think that Ben Shelton possesses the potential to become a superstar player. He won all his matches during the Laver Cup, and I saw one inside-out return that he hit on the deuce side in doubles that was absolutely out of this world. I would rate his power level top 2 in the world. The only other guy who can hit the ball as hard and as heavy as Shelton is Carlos Alcaraz. Whether Shelton can reach this level or not is a big question mark, but he's absolutely fantastic to watch. And of course, the trio of Fritz, Tiafoe, and Paul are phenomenal players, capable of producing amazing results. But especially in the US, it's very hard for these type of players to gain the respect of a broader audience. Why? Because very similarly to tennis in general, in the United States, people were so spoiled by Connors, McEnroe, Sampras, Agassi, that even someone like Andy Roddick, who was ranked #1 in the world, was getting a lot of flack for not being able to match the careers of those other American legends. So in the future years, unfortunately, all the new players that are coming up are going to be compared to Djokovic, to Nadal, to Federer. And outside of Alcaraz, I don't think there's anybody who can match not only the popularity, but also the level of play.